Welcome to the Megas Aeon Podcast, where the light of Gnosis destroys all ignorance, and what you thought you knew, you didn't. Alright, so James at Pandiras Box, welcome on my show. So you are officially the first guest of Season 2 of the Megas Aeon. So thanks for being on here. So I know the last time we did a little show was our old show back, I don't know, a few years ago at Aeon Arcanum. And
when did we do that? 2013, I think.
Yeah, that was like, oh boy, yeah,
4 years
2013.
ago.
Yeah, quite a while back. But
Yeah,
I know we had
3.5
like
years, something like that.
Yeah, so we had like Miguel Connor on it. We had Anthony Peake. We had Tony Sylvia from.
We had reincarnated Cathars, modern day Manichaeans,
Yeah, that was pretty cool stuff. We had Luciferian,
Gnostic circle jerks,
yeah, fun times.
and a bunch of guests that agreed to do it that we ended up not getting because we had too many life commitments and BS.
Right. Well, I'm hoping to fix that at one point in the future with those guys. Like, I know I want Rosamond Miller. I know I want.
Yeah, I mean, well, hopefully all these people are still alive by then, because as you know, Acharya S passed away. That's somebody we could have got as a guest.
Yeah.
You look at all these people that passed away this year, famous people. It's like, whoa, man.
Yeah, so I'm hoping all the people that I want to interview are still alive by then. So God willing.
So a lot of people are dropping off the face of the earth.
Well, I know you wrote an article for my website called Unconquered, how the early Roman Catholic Church usurped the cults of Apollo on Vatican Hill. That's quite a title. So, so you could tell us more about that article. I mean,
that is one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah, let's just talk about that.
I just have always been fascinated with not just Gnosticism in general. Gnosticism is something I've probably only been fascinated with for maybe 6 to 7 years, but history I've always been fascinated with, and especially the anomalies in history, which is probably why I've gravitated so much to kind of starting to accept Fomenko over the last couple of years, or Fomenka, should I say. Or like Graham Hancock and guys like that, looking back at just like all the crazy TV programs he used to do, and just all these other people. I was always fascinated by that. So wait, what do you want me to go over from the article?
Well, we could talk about, just exactly how Apollo and the whole Mithra cult and how, Catholicism really comes from this Mithra idea.
So you get the Mithra cult talked about a lot, and St. Ambrose supposedly had a lot of run-ins with the Mithra cult and all that stuff. But they say a lot of people, it's a popular claim, like Acharya S, I know, made the claim in one of her books. It might have been The Christ Conspiracy. But she talked about the birthday of Mithra is on the 25th, but also that Sol Invictus is on the 25th. And I don't know of anywhere where it says Mithra was born on the 25th, besides modern claims. However, the Sol Invictus claim is true. And the Mithra cult and the Sol Invictus cult are actually the same cult. And so what's interesting is, Constantine was a member of the Sol Invictus cult. Sol Invictus, the unconquerable son. Invictus was also a name that the emperor took on for himself. He called himself names like Invictus, Augustus, Maximus, things like that. So the unconquerable emperor, Constantine, actually called himself unconquerable, Invictus. And it was one of his titles. And Pontifex Maximus, things like that. So Sol Invictus is born on the 25th, and interestingly enough, there's a church in Rome called, Santa Croce in Jerusalem, right? Mm-hmm. And that is the place where the soil of Jerusalem, they brought a big dump truck or a wagon that they imported over to Rome from Jerusalem, which was a bunch of dirt from where Jesus died. And they brought a piece of the Holy Cross, or they brought the piece of the true cross there. And I guess it was Helen's house before or whatever. Wait, is her name Helen or Helena? I always forget.
Either one, but
I think it's Helena, right?
Yeah, Helena.
Yeah, Helena. His mother, Helena, she's actually another interesting thing is there's a bunch of competing theories on who her parents were, but one of the interesting theories is that her parents were actually the king and queen of Great Britain at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Constantinian dynasty or whatever, which is really like the second Flavian dynasty, they interbred with the British kings. Yeah. So she's the daughter of the British king at the time. And that's why when Constantius was stationed in York, he supposedly got his jiggy on with this British princess. And anyway, that Sol Invictus cult goes back to, when they drove the Syrian cult out, the cult of El Gabal, right? Which is what people tried to say at some point. Some historians, I don't remember who, but some historians say like, oh, they drove the El Gabal cult. Well, the truth is that the Elagabalus cult, the El Gabal cult, the Lord of the Mountain or whatever cult, it's actually the same cult as the Sol Invictus cult. It's just in Syrian. So they're just saying Sol Invictus in Syrian. It's the same god. It's just a different language. So that happens a lot. We read it and we go, oh, it looks like it's two different gods. Well, it's just a different language. Just like the Mithra cult is the Sol Invictus cult, but it's in Persia.
Okay.
And Persian territories.
Right. Like
the Ottoman-controlled areas and stuff. So Sol Invictus, El Gabal. Okay, so El Gabal was worshipped in Homs, Syria. Christians were not allowed in Homs, Syria early on, according to church fathers and historians, right? But the truth is that the cult is the same cult. They never distinguished Christianity from the Sol Invictus cult until the cults split from each other, which is very late. It's maybe in the 8th century. Who knows? It's very late that they split apart. It could have been the fall of Rome, 6th century. I don't know. But they split apart at some point. So Constantine had a giant statue erected, a bronze statue. It was a colossus, okay? And it was the colossus of Sol Invictus or Apollo, right? And it was there when you went into the Arch of Constantine. When you passed under the arch would actually frame the statue, which was way bigger than the arch. On top of the arch, there's a quadriga with Constantine in it. So it looks like Constantine is saying, oh, Apollo over Constantine, right? But in reality, you get in there and you see that he's saying he is Sol Invictus or Apollo. And it's right next to the Colosseum. So that's interesting too. But anyway, this cult, they had a bunch of feast days and they had holidays, right? Just like any cult. Just like the Catholic cult has a bunch of feast days for the martyrs that were established sometime in the reign of Pope Siricius and Pope Damasus were the earliest, was really the earliest martyr cult, despite what any other book tries to say. Really that's the earliest time. And they have the catacombs and all this, and they're going around, they're finding random people who died that were involved in the Christian cult, Gnostic cults, the Sol Invictus cult, whatever, and they're just saying, oh, this guy's a saint. And they're adopting him as Catholic. And even changing their names. They're going so far as to change their names. They're just using their dead bodies in their coffins, basically. And you look at the coffins, even they have coffins in the Vatican Museum that they're loaded with Promethean imagery, like Adam, All the early images of Adam are really just sculptures and images of Prometheus. That they said, no, that's Adam, but it's Prometheus on all of them. I mean, some of them even say it on it. They even have Prometheus etched under it, and you see it gets cut out and changed to Adam or whatever. So when they're taking over all these cultic areas, they're changing stuff. Just like they're moving obelisks from Egypt, and just all kinds of stuff like that. And you'll find that a lot of the martyrs, their feast day, which is their birthday or their death day, which is the same thing, right? Their death day becomes their feast day in the church, right? Well, most of those days are pagan holidays that have to do with the Apollo cult. The vast majority of them.
Well, the Adam and Prometheus connection, it kind of makes sense. I mean, when you look at Hesiod's work, Theogony.
Well, just like Heracles carrying the sheep becomes Jesus Christ carrying the sheep.
Uh-huh.
So the point is that there's these prototypical stories, like the giants, the gigantomachy, which you find at, of course, the Temple of Zeus at Pergamon, right? The Pergamon altar, which I think is preserved in Berlin or something now, right? The Pergamon altar, or Pergamos altar, which, by the way, Pergamos is another name for Troy.
Right.
But the Pergamos altar actually depicts scenes about Heracles and the gigantomachy and stuff like that. Well, scenes like that they'd later say, oh, well, that's the patriarchs fighting the giants. Like Joshua killing giants or something would be Heracles. Heracles has parallels with Joshua, Jesus.
Yeah. So the Titans are like the Nephilim, right?
The Titans, the Nephilim.
Or the Watchers, or the Angels.
Yeah, they're like the Watchers, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what the fuck are the Nephilim.
The fallen ones, the giants.
Right. The Nephilim. No, they aren't the giants. The Nephilim are the Watchers.
The Watchers, right? Yeah. The ones who descend.
Right. You have to remember that the Titans and the giants are two completely different things in Greek mythology.
Okay.
Although the Christians would often boggle them together. They're a completely different thing. It's two completely different wars that have nothing to do with each other. And it's the same thing in the Bible. The Watchers and the Giants have nothing to do with each other at all. They're not from the same time period. What the Giants are, and I'll tell you in plain English what the Giants really are. There's a cultural memory to the time when Mediterranean Europeans came into contact with the Celtic barbarians. Celtic men are taller because Celtic populations, the earliest immigrants from Africa, black immigrants from Africa, that became the modern Celtic white man, at some point in history they migrated there, and over time they became white. And genetically they were very tall. And that is why a lot of Northern European white men are tall like black men, because they have that same genetic marker. So that's something that's prevalent in their culture. And so they were considered giants. And the giants, many black men were considered giants too. So the closer you get to the Mediterranean, men tend to be a little bit shorter. But they're not looking at these giants like, oh my God, they're 8 feet tall, like the Bible says and shit like that. These guys are probably between 6'2" and 6'10" on average.
Doesn't the book of
most of the
Enoch,
really tall ones being about 6'6"?
Yeah. Doesn't the book of Enoch?
So
Doesn't the book of Enoch talk about the angels having sex with women and then they gave birth to like these cannibalistic giants or whatever? Or like they're like the origin of demons.
Angels had sex with women.
Yeah.
And gave birth to cannibalistic giants. Yeah,
well,
Greek mythology basically says the same type of stuff too. I mean, the thing is, it's hard to. There's no serious. The only way, the problem with the academia is the only way they look. They've determined that there's a different way to look at myth than there is at history, and because of that, they've developed a certain set of criteria for each discipline. So they don't apply any of the historical or criteria they apply to history to myth. And because of that, there's an absolute refusal to see any history in there. And they said if there's any in there, we can't ascertain what it is.
Right.
And because of that, you're not really allowed to look at myths from a historical perspective in academia, and that's actually what ruins academia, is because the myths are based on history, and there is way more ascertainable history to them than you think. But if you follow a Scaligerrian chronology, then it's hard to see any value in them. They're just myths. But if we just write them off as myths, the problem is they write stuff off from the time of Plato and Pythagoras as myths. These are historical characters, you know, that are attested to by other people. Pythagoras is better attested than Jesus.
So, on that note, who's Scaliger?
So, Scaliger, or Justus Josephus Scaliger, who Fomenko thinks is Josephus.
Oh, really? Okay.
I'm trying to remember when he was writing, like the late 1600s or the 1700s, early 1700s, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Let me check. Maybe it's the late 1500s. I don't remember all that. Let's see. Scaliger. Oh, yeah, okay, late 1500s. So Scaliger's writing during the Renaissance, basically. So 1583, 1606 are when his two major works came out. That's what it's saying here. But anyway, what he did is he was the first one to really put together a universal chronology of the West and the East. And he's the one that determined, the first one to determine really, you know, what's bunk, what's myth, you know, and what's fact. Now, he doesn't use any scientific basis for how he determines this, though. He has absolutely no scientific basis. His only criteria is, does it have, just like historians would do now, according to like Bart Ehrman, are there sources that can corroborate each other? Okay. So he said if we can find it in this source and that source and we can kind of put it together, so then we can say that this happened. And one of the examples I think was, if we can say Xerxes lived at this time based on a Greek source and based on a Persian source, then if we can find him in the Bible, then we can line up the Bible with that. The problem is Xerxes' name never occurs in the Bible. So they took a king named Ahasuerus or something like that, and they said, oh, that's Xerxes. It's not, but he claimed it was. So he would find parallels between things, and he would just say, oh, well, that guy's the same guy as that guy. It actually doesn't say that in the original source. And in fact, if you're to make a lot of these characters that he says are the same character, if you're to make them the same, their lives completely contradict each other. But he only leaves in the facts that work for his case, you know?
So Fomenko, he says that was Scaliger the one that pretty much created history, or do I get that wrong?
No. Scaliger created universal chronology.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Remember, when we're talking about the modern study of history, it's not a study of history. Mm-hmm. It's not true. All these people that say they're historians. They're not historians. A historian is not someone that studies. It's not someone that specializes in chronology. That's a chronologist or a chronologer. They're completely different. A historian actually typically only documents a set time period. All the ancient historians only document certain time periods, like maybe a couple 100 years, 100 years, like Ab Urbe Condita, right? That's from the founding of the city. That's Livy's history of Rome, right? Well, he only goes over what Scaliger and others would say is about a 800-year history, right? Which isn't true. It's not. Livy doesn't have 800 years in there and whatever. But anyway, he goes over a certain length of history. So a lot of early historians might go over 60 years. Like some historians only cover their own lifetime. They actually go over all the events that happened in their lifetime. That's what most historians do. Someone that you could liken to a historian would be someone now who's like a journalist. A historian's really a journalist. They're someone who writes about the events of their time period completely based on hearsay. Mm-hmm. That's what a good historian is someone who just writes about their time period and based on hearsay and based on, and write a little about the past based on sources. But history is essentially all hearsay is what it is. It's not, It's not a scientific discipline like people make it out to be now. Universal chronology is a scientific discipline commonly mistaken as history. It's not history, though. That's what Scaliger invented.
Oh, I see. So let's kind of go back 2 steps, a little bit back. So Anatoly Fomenko. So who is this guy? Why is he so important, or why is he important to us?
Anatoly Fomenko is a Russian mathematician who is highly acclaimed in the field of mathematics. He's been criticized as, he shouldn't be studying history and all this because history has nothing to do with math. But this is just kind of like, what do you call it, like a smokescreen? I forget what fallacy it is. This happens because in academia and is a guild. There used to be guilds, and people go, guilds aren't around anymore. Well, it's not true. You know, they have trades, and they have trade unions, and then they also have academics. So academies.
Right.
So each academy they kind of see themselves as their own trade that no one else is really allowed to say anything about it unless they have a degree or some kind of certification from that academy. Then they don't really have any say on it. Everything they're saying is just nonsense. So academia is really just elitism, is all it is. It's just a bunch of elitists that claim that you can't know anything unless it was handed down to you. It's like the apostolic succession of intelligence.
Yeah, I was about to say the ivory tower connection. I mean, they're all in the ivory towers, you know? That's the old cliche, right?
Well, it's the same thing as apostolic succession. It's the idea that you can't really know anything about the church unless someone laid hands on you and passed down this knowledge to you. Except it's the idea that you can't really know anything unless you read it from a book or a dissertation from someone who actually learned it from someone else that can trace their lineage back to the beginning of the academy.
Yeah, you were talking about this, how we can kind of blame the Valentinian Christians for kind of like starting this phenomenon, and how it kind of like bit us. Right, because in the butt. They started it based on the Platonic Academy, actually, the earliest academy. They said, well, you know, and remember, Plato didn't found the Platonic Academy. It was founded by his followers. So what happened was the Valentinians actually, I forget which writings it is, but they talk a little about apostolic succession in the Nag Hammadi library, in the Valentinian writings in there. And they talk about it, Irenaeus talks about the apostolic succession. And so, you know, the Valentinians and stuff were basically arguing like, we got this from Paul, or we got it from Theodos, and Theodos got it from Paul. And so, you know, we could be pretty sure that this is accurate, right? Now, that could be the Orthodox making that up. I mean, but it's probably true. It's probably true that the Valentinians were arguing that, you know what I mean? So
they kind of got that going. It's kind of like, it's kind of like the academic version of Christianity, I guess.
Right. Well, I gotta read you something real quick here. It's from Justin Martyr. So he goes on to talk.
Justin Martyr, endless material.
Yeah, I'll just read just a little bit.
You could never, man. I don't think anyone could ever be an expert on Justin Martyr. It's just so extensive.
Yeah, I think it's from Dialogue with Trypho, but he says, for in the name of God the Father and Lord of the universe, and of our Savior Jesus Christ and of the Holy Spirit, they then receive the washing with water, and this washing is called illumination, because they who learn these things are illuminated in their understandings. And this food is called the Eucharist, of which no one is allowed to partake but the man who believes that the things which we teach are true, and who has been washed with a washing that is for the remission of sins and unto regeneration, and who is so living as Christ has enjoined. Then he talks about like how the cult of Mithra is like imitates
right, the Sol Invictus cult did that, and that actually comes from the Pythagoreans.
Uh-huh.
Because the Sol Invictus cult essentially is an outgrowth of the Pythagorean fire worshipping cult is really what it is. The Promethean cult is what I call it. I don't know anyone else that calls it that though. So I mean, if you're listening, don't take that as like some authoritative thing. Don't take anything I say as authoritative. But you know, I'm just a private researcher. But yeah, the idea of what I would call the Promethean cult is where the Sol Invictus cult comes from. But the Sol Invictus cult is where the oligarchy takes control. The oligarchy takes those beliefs and they grew up with that. You know what I mean? And so they kind of implement that religion into law, because remember that Plato and Pythagoras gave the Greeks religion.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They are the founders of modern religion. All modern Western religion can be traced back to Pythagoras and Plato, all of it, and Aristotle.
Yeah, I was listening to this one guy. I mean, I won't mention his name, but he's very much well known in a lot of conspiracy circles. But he was just like making fun of Pythagoras because he ate beans and he farted or something, or I don't know. He's making like fart jokes.
Well, remember, there's a lot of stories about that, and there's a lot of things we can make fun about all the Christian saints too. So let's not even go there. I mean, for the little amount of material that they have on Pythagoras, I have like 2 billion times more on all the saints combined. I mean, the saints are a joke, all of them.
Yeah, well, he's also mocking Gnosticism, how they're all a bunch of retards and they're rejects and they're a bunch of lunatics, and how UNESCO and the UN and the Rothschilds.
Well, the lunatic argument is actually a really sick argument that he should be ashamed for making, whoever he is, because that's from the Theodosian Code. That's actually how they determined to kill Priscillian.
Uh-huh.
The first martyr that was burned at the stake or whatever. They killed him for like witchcraft or whatever, but they claimed that he was insane. That's actually all Gnostics that were killed. They were killed on trumped up charges of insanity.
Uh-huh.
They were insane, not because of anything they did, but because of something they believed.
Right.
Right, and that's actually how philosophers and scientists were killed throughout the centuries. So that's not something that guy should be proud of. Orthodox and Catholic people, shouldn't be proud of that. I know there's a lot of Catholic guilt now, and that's why the last couple popes are a lot more accepting of Protestants and stuff like that, because they're actually good-hearted people that kind of feel bad about all that stuff happening, but they know the church did it. They're not going to deny it, but at the same time, they're like, damn, like, fuck, this place is fucked up. Look what office I got into. Shit, They're like, it's like Obama coming in after Bush, It's like, fuck, man, I know, I can't deny this stuff, but when people talk about it, I just kind of have to hope it goes away as quick as it can. I'm not going to apologize for it because I had nothing to do with it, but fuck, dude, just like sympathize with them and move on. And that works. It works actually really well. It went really well for Obama, and it went really well for the last couple popes. The only thing that did the last pope in, though, was, too much baby fucking. They didn't spend enough time baptizing them with water. They were baptizing them with semen.
Yeah, well, that's what the Gnostics were accused of, that they ate semen and menses and like babies or whatever, like Gnostic Pizzagate or whatever. Yeah. But,
see, the church has never had a problem in, honestly, throughout the centuries, the Roman church specifically, not the entire church, the church that's centered in Rome, has never had a problem with human sex trafficking and all that stuff. Openly, they might say something against it here and there. They try to avoid talking about it at all because they don't even want to get people on that subject. But I mean, they've been taking unbaptized Gentile non-Christian children and selling them into sex slavery for centuries. It's a normal practice. It was done in the Renaissance too. It's not something that's new.
Didn't the Gospel of Judas say that these
allegedly the Cerinthians were fucking children too? That's actually where it comes from.
Oh, interesting.
The Cerinthian tradition.
Well, didn't the Gospel of Judas say that these Catholic priests actually have sex with each other, and actually also they have sex with children? They fuck children and they sacrifice them, right?
Right. Yep.
So and the Gospel of Judas is a Gnostic text, by the way.
Yep. Proof from the 2nd century that the Roman Catholic Church has been fucking children ever since.
Yeah, it's pretty sick.
That is one of the most condemning, damning passages ever. You should actually read that passage. That's actually one of my favorite passages from a Gnostic text because it's so fucking brutal. And all the scholars admit that Judas is at least a 2nd century text.
Doesn't this talk about how
even the apologists, like you can go on YouTube and watch these apologists who just rail against Gnosticism. They'll talk about, all these texts are 4th century, this and that, but then they get to the Gospel of Judas and they go, oh yeah, it's a 2nd century text. And then they go, oh, well, the only thing scholars really argue over is whether it makes Judas a bad guy or a good guy. And there's all these arguments on that, whatever. It makes all the apostles ignorant idiots like the Marcionites did. I mean, that's what Gnostics typically did, because they didn't, obviously it's not a Valentinian text because the Valentinians probably had a higher view, of the apostles. But
well, in that text, the apostles actually kill a bunch of women and children. It's pretty crazy.
Well, yeah, that text actually predicts all the stuff that happens in the 4th century under Pope Damasus. That's another interesting thing. Because Pope Damasus actually led an army of gladiators that he paid off. He actually emptied the church treasury, stole all the money from the church treasury at Rome to pay off gladiators and vagrants and all these other different people to attack the other pope who he stole the office from. He had them attacked and killed. He had an attack mounted where these gladiators surrounded them and a bunch of vagrants and stuff went up to the top of the church or the basilica. I think it might have been the Julian Basilica. And they threw the roof tiles down, killing all the innocent Christians in there and the Pope while they were at Mass.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's actually written about in the Collectio Avellana, which is actually a Vatican document. It's from the Vatican Library.
Interesting. Hey, I'm going to read a passage from Judas. So
read it. That's a good one.
Yeah, so it says, Jesus said to them, those who have seen receiving the offers at the altar, that is who you are. Well, he's talking about how these apostles pretty much they sacrifice all this women and children. It's pretty crazy. I'm like, wow, I can't believe this is even in the gospel like this.
Well, I think the sacrifice is also talking about the Eucharist.
Oh, right. It's like how they, in the Eucharist they believe.
Well, he's talking about how they're sacrificing to idols. They're doing what they say they hate.
Well, it's like, in the Eucharist, they believe that the Catholics and the Orthodox, they believe that the Eucharist is literally the blood and flesh of Jesus Christ, transubstantiation, right?
Well, the Roman Catholics believe that they believe in transubstantiation, which is an idea from Aristotle. They got it from Aristotelian logic, that there's an accident that occurs. So it somehow it transmutes into the substance, the divine substance, or whatever. I'm butchering this so bad, but basically, it actually becomes. It starts off as regular bread and wine, but because of your belief, right? If you're a true Christian, when you take it, you're actually eating the flesh and blood of Jesus.
Right.
It doesn't physically actually become it, but it actually becomes it in being or essence,
or the spirit, I guess, of the bread.
Right, yeah. It becomes it in the unseen, invisible world of ideas and concepts. It takes on the shape and form of the body of blood, which makes no sense because in that world there is no flesh and blood. So, but anyway, that's their wacky idea. It's impossible for transubstantiation to exist in the definitions of Plato. It's weird that they combine accidents and all these ideas from Aristotle with the unseen world of forms and whatever, because Aristotle doesn't even believe in that and redefines it. So they're really looking at it in an Aristotelian way, which really makes no sense to me, being a Platonist. But
yeah. Well, let me read you finish this quote here. It just says, Jesus said to them, those you have been receiving the offerings at the altar. That is who you are. That is the God you serve. And you are those 12 men you have seen. The cattle you have seen brought for sacrifice are the many people you would lead astray. So he's saying that these priests, the apostles, are going to lead the whole world astray.
Right, and what's interesting there is that the disciples or apostles, Judas is included in the 12, and he says that you guys are going to go up, and basically gives you this image of them and picture of them, that they're going to go up as bishops and lead congregations in basilicas, and they're going to be like 4th century popes and bishops, right? They're going to have church councils, all this stuff. That's the image you're getting of them as you read that, And Judas is going to be one of those people. What's interesting, though, is you're told that Judas committed suicide. Yet there's an early source, church father Papias of Hierapolis, I think it was. He actually says that Judas didn't commit suicide.
Oh, really?
He talks, right. They make up some, like Bart Ehrman and some other guys pick some fake Papias source from like the 10th century and quote it. But there's an earlier one, and that's on Judas, but there's an earlier one that he doesn't talk about the Acts, the story in Acts or whatever about Judas guts busting out or whatever. He says Judas was ran over by a chariot.
Oh, wow.
Now, there's no implication that it happened in the time of Jesus, though. So Judas did betray Jesus, but he never felt bad for it. That's the thing. Judas was told to betray Jesus, and that's what that gospel gives away, the fact that not only was Judas told to betray Jesus, he was actually told that it was necessary, and he actually did become a bishop of the early church and lead a congregation like he was destined to do. And then he was run over by a chariot, and that's how he died, and his guts spilled everywhere because he was run over by the chariot.
Oh, no.
That's what actually happened, according to that gospel, and that's the early 2nd century tradition.
So I'm going to finish this quote here. So it says, "Another man will stand there from the fornicators, another will stand there from the slayers of children, another from those who sleep with men, and those who abstain, and the rest of the people of pollution and lawlessness and error, and those who say we are like angels. They are the stars that bring everything to its conclusion. For to the human generations..."
Oh, and the part where it's saying like we're like angels, that's the cult of the martyrs.
Oh.
The cult of the martyrs did all that stuff, and when they're talking, and like you got kind of a carpocration thing in there going on with the homosexuality. Right. You got the thing of the fornicators and stuff like that. It's like Cerinthians. There's all kind of, there's a lot of different stuff that accusations Catholics made against other groups. But yeah, all those, it shows there that all those groups are one. It's the Catholic group, and they were doing all that stuff in the 4th century.
Huh. So it says, "For to the human generations it has been said, look, God has received your sacrifice from the hands of a priest. That is a minister of error. But it is the Lord of the universe, who commands, on the last day they will be put to shame." So it's just saying that, these priests...
Well, he's saying you guys practice this, yet it says in your scriptures that you're going to be judged at the last day.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of poorly translated, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, we can
I'm
get.
sure it's
we
not
kind
an
of
easy job to translate something like that, but they could definitely do a lot better.
I think we can, but we can kind of get the gist of it though. Like it's basically saying, these priests, kind of like what it says in the other part where Jesus says that they sacrifice their own children, others their wives, in praise and humility with each other. Some sleep with men, some are involved in slaughter, some commit a multitude of sins and deeds of lawlessness. And the men who stand before the altar invoke your name, and in all the deeds of their deficiency, the sacrifices are brought to completion. And then after they said this, they were quiet, for they were troubled. So, I mean, I know it's. You can kind of get the gist that they're saying that, these priests, these pedophile priests, are under the control of the archons.
Well, you know what I get from it when I'm reading it too. I don't know anyone that gets this from it, but when I'm reading that and I'm hearing that even, I'm getting this image that it says it's got to be brought to completion, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's saying, oh yeah, they need to go sacrifice all this because really, you know, it's the God above God, the unknown God. It's his will, which is basically Serapis, by the way. It's basically his will. It's the Platonic God, Pythagorean God. It's his will that the universal spirit's will that matter come to an end, and this is just a way to facilitate it. So, you know, that's why they need to martyr Gnostics. The Gnostics need to be martyred, and they need to be killed, not so that the cause grows, just so that the material universe comes to an end quicker, because that's like really the whole goal, if you look at it, of Gnosticism. And what better reason to be a transhumanist? You know what I mean? Like, why not just create an army of robots and just fucking wipe humanity out? I mean, what the fuck? I mean, if we're not going to augment ourselves and make ourselves better than we are, then let's just fucking make robots that'll be better than us. You know, ideally, the ideal thing, if you want to keep human consciousness alive, would be, you know, augment ourselves and we can keep up with the robots, you know? Then we can live in a Blade Runner type of utopia rather than Blade Runner type dystopia. You know? Like what Blade Runner actually is. But a utopian version of that would be great. But, you know, ultimately, it seems like the Gnostic mindset is just like, you know, really material creation needs to go away, you know?
Ultimately. Yeah, that's where a lot of the refutations of Gnosticism kind of to talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, it's not that the Gnostics are ever, at no point have I ever read a Gnostic text where they're talking about, I mean, maybe there's a couple where they're a little harsh, but there's none where they're just like flat out saying, oh God, the world's such a shithole.
Right.
You know, there's nothing beautiful to life. I've never come across a Gnostic text that's that pessimistic.
Yeah, isn't there like?
But it is accurate to say that they don't want material creation to continue. Yeah,
doesn't that say? I think in the Testimony of Truth they talk about that a little bit, right? Like,
that's why they probably. I mean, I don't think Gnostics would have had a problem with suicide, but I don't think they endorse suicide. I've never seen an endorsement of it. But I think that they wouldn't have had a problem with Judas like that. And I think that's why the church creates the myth of Judas killing himself, because it was easy to do. It was really easy to come up with that. It's like, damn, it's such good polemic that it's like, it's hard not to see them doing that. Like, I think any of us, if we were in their shoes, we would have done it. We would have said like, oh yeah, you know, he had to have felt guilty. You know?
Right.
And so he killed himself. And he's trying to redeem himself, but suicide doesn't redeem you. He went to hell anyway.
Right.
You would think Judas's act would have redeemed him,
but didn't.
Yeah, so that's where it doesn't make any sense anymore. Okay, it didn't redeem him. Suicide's bad. Oh, so when you betray someone to try to make up for it by killing yourself is not good. Oh, okay. It doesn't make any fucking sense to me. You know,
yeah.
But they also do that on purpose because they know the Gnostics are such anti-materialists. They want to say, oh, perfect. Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you're Gnostic, see, Judas was a Gnostic. This is where that kind of thinking gets you. It makes you kill yourself and betray your best friend.
Yeah, that's where...
Who's actually God.
That's where some Catholic was saying that, oh, if you hate, you know, matter so much, why don't you just kill yourself and just be done with it?
Right.
You know?
Because they make their slippery slope arguments. See, because Catholics, they can't argue about an actual point. They have to take everything on a slippery slope so that way they can divert you from the argument.
Uh-huh.
You know, which is what Peter does to Simon Magus in the Clementine literature. Like, he's telling him, oh, yeah, you know, oh, you believe that there's multiple gods in Genesis. Oh, but have you ever considered that there's false scriptures?
Right, that's pretty crazy. Well,
it's like, oh, thanks for taking me off track. I thought I was arguing with someone who believed that the scriptures were divine from God. Oh shit, my bad.
Oh, so Peter believes that Genesis there's some false scriptures in it, or false
that's all.
Stuff
Those
in
are
it?
False scriptures. That's the false scriptures. God put those in there because he knew heretics would read it, and so that's his way of separating the wheat from the chaff. You know,
right?
God wanted to make sure if you were born stupid, that just told you were stupid. And it has this Valentinian Gnostic element to it too. It's like, oh, if you were born that way, you're just a Heilig. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you can't change. You're a fucking Heilig for life. You know? It's kind of like the Catholics turning it around, and instead of saying psychic, pneumatic, or Heilig, they're just basically labeling you the same way, or they're defining you as how a Heilig's defined, but they're not labeling you that way.
Well, let's talk about Simon Magus on that note. So, yeah, I mean, I've been talking about this guy like for a long time.
Simon Magus is probably the most fascinating anomaly in church history.
Yeah, and he connects with a lot of different people. Everyone from John the
When
Baptist.
I first got interested in this idea, Simon Magus is really like a cipher for Peter or Jesus or something, like, because I would watch Protestant like apologists. I think they were like Calvinists and different people like that, and they would put on these amazing, monologues on YouTube about how, Simon Magus is really the founder of the Roman Church, and the church was founded on where he died at the Vatican, and just all this different stuff, because supposedly he died at the Vatican, which is also where the Temple of Apollo was, by the way, like I said.
Oh.
And, and it's outside of Rome. What's weird is, I think, isn't that where Nero's gardens were? I might be wrong. Nero's gardens, I think, were there, though, right? How would that burn down the city of Rome when it's across the Tiber? It's not even in Rome.
Well, isn't there like a statue in Tiber River called Simone Sanko or something that's like tribute to Simon Magus?
Allegedly, yeah.
But that Samosankis deity, that's also the same as Mithra, isn't it, or Apollo or something like that? So
I'm not too sure. I think maybe Apollo.
But that's where you get the
No, I thought
Simon.
It was Heracles.
Maybe it's both, but you look at but you notice all those connections though.
I honestly think the Samosankis, I could be wrong, but I don't find it convincing. I don't think it's related at all. I think that's just Justin Martyr making a mistake.
But I just find it interesting that he connects like Hercules, Mithra, Apollo, and Simon all together. So I mean, it kind of makes sense a little bit, but
yeah. And I think Samosankis, wasn't he like an Etruscan deity or something?
I think he was. Yeah,
I'm
probably.
a little
out
of season on that whole topic right there, but
no, I just
we
mentioned
something. There's something there, yeah.
Yeah, but when you mentioned the Tiber River, I just thought of that. But but the Simon Magus though, I mean, he's very influential. I mean, when you connect him with Jesus, to Peter, to Paul, to John the Baptist,
the
list goes on and on.
The Clementines give you a lot of information on Simon Magus that the church is kind of probably embarrassed about. Yeah. Even though now, because of Scaliger and all these other people, it isn't taken serious. It's another thing Scaliger enabled is the ability to wholesale write off of sources that, they just say, oh, that source is no good.
Mm-hmm.
Wholesale write off of inconvenient sources, I guess you could say. And so that's a source that it's, there can't be anything in it. But yet there's so much. I mean, they show you that John, if you compare that with Josephus and, as in Flavius Josephus, and with the Bible and any other, like the Mandaean sources and any other source that has John mentioned, and even the Church Fathers, I mean, you come to the conclusion that John, you read the Gospels and you have this weird version of John that you don't have anywhere else. It's only in the Gospels. Mm-hmm. That John just doesn't exist anywhere else. Not to mention Salome doesn't exist, by the way. She's only in the Gospels. Uh-huh. There is no Salome in Josephus. She doesn't exist. There's no asking for the head of John and all this nutty shit by Salome anyway. There is a beheading of John, or him being put in prison in Machaerus, which is a castle or citadel. And so, anyway, John dies before Jesus gets baptized by John. So what's interesting is you have how could John the Baptist baptize Jesus when he was already dead?
Oh.
John dies before Jesus' baptism. if you were to follow it from a chronological standpoint. Chronologically,
is this
it doesn't
from
work.
Is this from the Cleansing Homilies? Is where you're basing this information
based on
from?
the Homilies and Josephus, yes.
Okay.
So actually, you can base that 100% just off of Josephus. Josephus, side by side with the Bible, it's impossible for John the Baptist to have baptized Jesus. It's impossible for John the Baptist to have been in prison and communicated with Jesus after Jesus' baptism while Jesus was doing his ministry. It couldn't have been possible.
So how does this connect to Simon Magus, though?
Well, what's interesting is Simon Magus actually comes back to Jerusalem after the death of John the Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus comes back to Jerusalem after... he comes back to Jerusalem before the death of John the Baptist, and then you know what I mean, and then he gets baptized.
Uh-huh.
I think is how it happened, right? Yeah, so it just kind of reverses the order, but both of them went into Egypt.
Right.
Jesus went to Egypt because he was fleeing Herod, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, Simon goes to Egypt at the time that before Herod and John had a problem and whatever. And in Josephus, there's no slaughter of the infants. Now remember, the Bible, the New Testament never claims to be fact. It claims to be true. They're different. It's not a factual account. It's a true account. So in other words, when they're talking about him killing the infants, it never mattered to them whether it really happened or not. What mattered is that was his intention.
Mm-hmm.
So because they often look at his intentions as the truth. So therefore, it's like it really happened. So the thing is what really happened was that Herod did, before he died, he was planning on killing the infants. He was going to slaughter the infants. And so he got the hippodrome in Caesarea, Palestina, and he was going to fill it with newborns and firstborns or some shit like that. I think it was like newborns and women or something. He was going to slaughter all of them. But he died before he could do it.
Interesting.
And I think he does that after the death of John the Baptist. I think it's Herod the Great that kills John the Baptist and Josephus.
Now, so when Jesus goes to Egypt, isn't he a child at this point, though, with Mary and Joseph?
Huh?
Or am I wrong? When Jesus goes to Egypt, so isn't he a child at this point,
Correct,
though?
He's a child, yeah.
Okay, so will that account for this whole... let's just say...
He was either a teenager or a young adult.
Right, so let's just say, for argument's sake, that, okay, Jesus is a literal character, etc., etc.
Right.
Now, would that account for the idea where there's like all these years missing in his life, that he was actually initiated into some Egyptian mystery cult, maybe?
Yeah, well, the reason there's years missing in Jesus' life is because originally the infancies and the childhood years of Jesus were not part of the Bible, because originally Jesus just comes down from heaven.
Okay.
So Jesus wasn't originally a human in the earliest Gospels. They make him into a human. They euhemerize him.
Right.
So
doesn't Marcion's Gospel have him like come out of the clouds?
Right.
From heaven,
Marcion's Gospel, he comes from out of the sky, and he seems to be a man, but he's really divine. He's a divine figure.
Oh, so that's the heresy of Docetism. Dun dun dun.
Yeah, give or take. Yeah, I mean, Docetism can be argued about three different ways, but essentially, yeah, it's a branch of Docetism. Yeah. Yeah.
So where did Docetism come from? I know there's like a Docete cult.
Yeah, well, Docetism is just a nutty misunderstanding by the church in a lot of ways, because it's not entirely clear whether, I mean, there's in the Marcionite Gospel, there are parts where Jesus physically interacts with things, and it's very clear that he does have the ability to go in and out of reality. Kind of like the Matrix, like with Neo. Neo can manipulate physical reality, right? So
right.
Jesus, because he's the one, right? So he can kind of go in and out of physical reality. He's not entirely phantasmal. He takes on flesh. He actually does take on flesh. And they argue that, well, if he ever does take on flesh, it's merely for the means of a magic trick. Put it back up on YouTube. But yeah, it's Docete doesn't necessarily just mean to seem. There's more to it than that. It's a really complicated thing. Probably not something we want to go into on this, but
right in this show. But maybe on the future podcast we could talk about Docetism.
I'm not really prepared for that discussion right now, but it's interesting for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I know Paul kind of alludes to it, doesn't he? Like, he talks about how,
well, yeah, I mean, like
Christ took on a form of man.
I mean, if you take out all the interpolation in Paul, I mean, you're left with a Christ. There's no Jesus.
Right.
You don't have a Jesus anymore. And then when he becomes the earliest interpolations are the adoptionist interpolations, where what happens here's actually Paul's a good example of this. Here's how Jesus evolved from God to God-man. He actually went from God to man to God-man. So first there's Christ, and there is no Jesus. Christ is this figure that comes down, enlightens people, and disappears. Then there's the adoptionist, Jesus and Christ. So Christ goes into this man Jesus, and Christ is basically the Logos. He goes into this man Jesus, and he's with him until Jesus is hung on the cross, where he leaves him on the cross. Jesus dies, but God isn't affected. Okay? That's the I guess you could say, the Jesus, the vessel. He's a vessel of Christ, right? And then you get this other Jesus who's kind of like neo-Marcionite type of deal, where I guess it's just for the means of satire by Tertullian, but he's a physical man that's a God man that comes out of the sky, that comes to earth, does all this stuff, and then he dies, and God dies on the cross. You have that version of Jesus. Then you have this other version of Jesus where he's like a Valentinian version of Jesus. He passes through Mary in this pseudo-virgin birth, but he never really takes on flesh. You know what I mean? And then you have the one where he's born to Mary the Virgin. He does take on flesh. And that's the final one. That's the one that stuck as Catholic. You know what I mean? But yeah, Jesus went through about 5 different revisions of whether, he was a God-man, a man-God, God became a man that became God again. I mean, it's just like this really complicated series of maybe 5 or so different Christologies that evolved over the course of the 2nd century.
Doesn't that what Athanasius say, that God became man so men can become God?
And Athanasius and Origen, and probably Valentinus might have probably said that too, but they say God became man so that man might become God, which that's actually a lot of Protestants will say that's the very essence of the Gnostic heresy. Is that that is a core Gnostic belief, is that God became man so that man might become God.
Theosis.
Yeah, theosis, and it's Eastern Orthodoxy, and he's coming to show you that there's a spark of the divine in you, and that you need to return to the beginning. You need the apokatastasis needs to happen, where that's the restoration of all things spiritual back to the spirit that is, behind the invisible part behind the universe, Plato's invisible world of forms or whatever, right? And that's where the material creation needs to end. And Origen believed in that. And then there's, the ideas of reincarnation. Origen, the early Valentinians, they all believe in that.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be far-fetched to assume that Athanasius probably believed in reincarnation as well.
I think Basilides also believed in reincarnation, didn't he? I don't remember. Yeah.
All the Gnostics believed in reincarnation too, by the way, is because all Gnostic groups would have believed in that. Because if you have three natures, it's mandatory to believe in reincarnation. Pythagoras believed in it too, but you have to believe in it if you're going to believe in three natures. It's illogical. I mean, it'd be extremely illogical not to. I mean, because look, Hylics, they keep coming back. Because where's their soul going to go? What has to keep going back to nature? Right. Pneumatics don't do that. Pneumatics escape the flesh. They don't reincarnate.
So
when you believe in reincarnation, it's not the belief that everything reincarnates, by the way. It's that those deserving of reincarnation reincarnate.
So how does this fit with the Gnostic view of hell? Do the Gnostics believe in hell?
It depends on what you mean by hell. I mean, like, do you mean like as in like, hell, like
Hades,
Dante's hell and Hades, and what people really used to believe hell was?
Yeah.
Before everyone got wishy-washy in the last couple hundred years?
Yeah, let's go for that.
Yeah, okay. The classic actual biblical hell. Okay. Wait, what was the question again?
No, like, what was the original view of hell? Like, how did the Gnostics view hell? Like, how does that connect to reincarnation? Like, well, are there any connections there?
I don't really think the Gnostics believed in hell. I think maybe they believed, and maybe Valentinians and Manichaeans and stuff might have believed that psychic Christians had a chance to. Hell was like in Egypt. It was like the duat for the Gnostics. Is like you had to, for some Gnostics, not all of them. You had to give passwords, right? You had to say all the passwords and stuff like that to get past the archons.
Right. That's heaven, right.
What did they call that in Eastern? The Toll House heresy.
Toll House, right? Yeah.
Toll House heresy.
That's okay. So
that's
pure Gnosticism.
There were really not Gnostic sects that believed in that. I think Origen probably believed in that, and. Yeah, that's the heresy of Seraphim Rose, right?
Oh, right. Yeah, a lot of the Orthodox.
Yes, the Toll House.
Yeah.
Toll House is one Gnostic view of hell, and yet another Gnostic view of hell is that we're already there. And so hell is the material realm, but the duat's an extension of the material realm. It's what binds you to material consciousness, and that the only way to escape it is to know the passwords or to have your heart weigh less than a feather. Right.
Which is why you're supposed to be born again, like in John 3, right?
Right, to get past Osiris. And I think that's all really a metaphor for whether you. I don't think that really happens in the afterlife. I think that happens in this world. Like, did you really find all the truths of the parables?
Right.
The Egyptian cult and Jesus, they all had a series of parables that are supposed to reveal the mysteries. Mm-hmm. And the mysteries are knowing that reincarnation is a fact and understanding the threefold nature of reality and the hidden forms and all these different things were illustrations for those mysteries. I mean, essentially, if you look at Gnosticism and Pythagoreanism and you kind of put it together, you really can figure out the mysteries. I mean, Paul goes over like 3 of them. I don't remember what they are, but he goes over them. I'd have to look up my old videos and find them.
Yeah, he had a lot of really interesting videos, and I remember you were talking about how the Gnostics viewed,
I'd have to. I have a video
from
called
Scripture.
On the Mysteries that talks about that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, getting back to this whole idea of Fomenko and his chronology, and about how did he view Jesus in the New Testament Scripture as opposed to the Old Testament?
He doesn't talk about it a lot. He just says look, Jesus was born in 1152 and died in 1183, some shit like that. Okay. He was like I think he was like some ruler at Constantinople who was killed on Joshua's Hill near Constantinople.
So he basically thinks that a lot of the vast majority of history.
Well, he thinks
really
Christianity started in Turkey before the Ottomans took over.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is what I think too. I mean, I have thought that for a long time. I didn't think it was before the Ottomans took over, but I thought it started in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
And where's Paul's missionary journey start? Pretty much in Turkey, right? Another thing is interesting is the city of Sinope. Sinope's very interesting. God damn it! I came across information a while ago. I'm trying to remember what it was, but Sinope. Oh fuck! Damn, dude, Sinope is. There's something interesting about Sinope. I forgot what it was. That might have to be saved for another podcast if I can remember it. I wonder if I wrote it down. I had to.
Oh, I know Marcion. Well, I know Marcion was born in Sinope.
Well, yeah, no, that's not the interesting thing about it. What's interesting about it is that having known that and then knowing this and you put them together, it's crazy. About how it's an early center for Gnosticism.
Uh-huh. Well, I think it was like Sinope was like the daughter of Apollo, wasn't she?
No, it's not. It's not about the mythology. That's not what I found.
Okay.
You might be right on that, but it's not about mythology. I think you're right on that, though. God, I don't remember. I've come across the fact a few times, and then I always forget it.
Oh, okay. So it's like, I think it's something like how it was Marcion's hometown, and she pledged to always remain a virgin despite Zeus.
History in Sinope. I don't remember if it's related to the Crusades or the time of Pythagoras or what. There's something about it. Maybe I can find it, but we'll just go ahead and skip to another subject or.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I want to. Yeah. So I want to talk about this whole controversy with Jerusalem now. That's how Donald Trump has named Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, he's a fucking idiot.
That's
such a grievous error, man. That's just like that. Just shows that you have no regard for. It's just disrespectful, A. And he has no regard for anybody's safety. I mean, come on, dude. Yeah. You're supposed to protect the civilian population of the U.S. I mean, and you're supposed to try to ensure goodwill towards the rest of the world. I mean, you're not doing that when you do that. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, but the interesting thing though about Jerusalem, I think we were talking about this, right. How that possibly the Knights Templar were actually established Jerusalem, and somehow it's connected with the Trojan War. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Wait, what?
About the Jerusalem, the Trojans.
Oh, well, Jerusalem was called during the Crusades. It was actually called Ilia, which is like and that's what it's called by Muslims sometimes. Like Arab sources call it Ilia, and Ilia sounds a hell of a lot like Ilios or Ilium, which sounds a lot like Jerusalem, shortened. Ilium, Ilium. Yeah, Ilem, Salem.
So now Salem, isn't that like some sort of deity connected with Jupiter, right? Isn't it?
I think Salem was like a deity or something. Man, there was another interesting fact I came across with that too recently. I forgot it. Fuck.
Oh no.
Yeah, Salem is. It's interesting what it actually means. What does Salem mean? I forget. It doesn't mean what you think. Or they say it means what do they say? It means peace or something like that. Place of rest or peace or some shit. It's not what it means.
No, I think no. I'm sorry. No, I'm mixing up with Zedek. No, Zedek, from Melchizedek, right?
No, I think they say Salem's a god too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, Zedek is like Jupiter or something.
Yeah. Salem,
or Zedek is.
I forget what it doesn't mean what they say it means. You know what? I'm going to write this down so that way I can remember to try to find this information, because this is interesting stuff. This stuff I've never told you about. The stuff on Salem and Sinope I have never talked to you about.
Okay, well, I did find something. Now tell me if this is... Well, tell me if it's true or not. So this is Salem. This is from Wikipedia, so I'm reading it. So it's Shalem. It's a god in the Canaanite religion pantheon. Right,
but I mean that's all bullshit.
Oh, really? So tell me more.
Bullshit they make up. They find this is what these fuckers will do sometimes. They'll find something that says like Harosh Kadesh or some shit. It's got some fucking weird name. They go, oh yeah, that's the god Salem. Yeah, because they said, oh yeah, you know, it looks like it would be shortened to Shalem, and oh yeah, you know, it's got an S in it. They don't care if it's like 20 letters long. Oh yeah, but you know, like, because they would hypercharisticize or whatever, charisticize. They make up fucking crazy shit. I'm just telling you, dude. Like, honestly, when I've read shit, I walk away from it looking at it going like, how the fuck did they come to this conclusion? That's what Scaliger created that. Scaliger will take names that are completely unrelated and he'll make up some fucking weird fake etymology, like Justin Martyr does it too. He makes up some fake ass etymology to try to show how it's the same thing. It's completely unrelated. It comes from two different cultures. They're not even talking about that. And you find it's like, okay, you know where else they do that? Ahura Mazda. Okay? And so there's what's the argument? What's the argument with Ahura Mazda? Who is it? It's like Cyrus the Great or Darius or one of them. They have a monument that says that they're praying to Ahura Mazda, right? And they go, oh yeah, they were Zoroastrians. Oh. Right, but Ahura Mazda is if you read it in one dialect, it says Ahura Mazda. If you read it in another dialect, it says like Moloch or something like that.
Moloch, huh?
Yeah, I don't remember. Moloch? It's the fucking. There's an inscription. I don't even know if it's the Ahura Mazda, but the point is that it can be read two different ways, and it's talking about two different gods.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of instances where this happens, and Fomenko would argue that this happens because there are different sources in different dialects or different languages that are from the same time period, but the Scaligerian chronology has recorded them as being in different time periods. That's why they're parallel, because that's why they have so many things in common, and that's why chronologically they tend to follow the same order of events, even though they're 1,000 years apart or 600 years apart, because he found them, and he found a name in it that resembled a name from another document, and he said, well, those had to have happened in that time period. When in fact you find there's different instances where Livy talks about Pythagoras knowing Numa Pompilius, the king of Rome. Well, you know, how do you know Numa Pompilius, but yet he lived in the time of Croesus and Solon? How'd that happen? How did all these guys live in the same time period when they're all 100 years apart from each other? You know, according to Scaligerian chronology. They couldn't have lived at the same time. But that never occurred to any of the ancients, because in all the original sources, yeah, they all live at the same time. That no one ever argued about it. No one had any qualms about it. They didn't say anything about it. They were just like, yeah. They very matter-of-factly stated, yeah, these guys lived at the same time. No debate.
So, Knights Templar. So we were talking about this the other day, and you were just saying that. I was actually just speculating that it's possible that these guys actually created perhaps even history as we know it. And the reason I say that is, I mean, they're just associated with like creating, establishing Jerusalem. And the whole idea of the Temple of Solomon. I mean, not so much that maybe they did create it or build it. I don't know, but it's just weird that so much of history seems to flow from them. I don't know. It's weird how it works out. But I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
A lot of history flowing from the Templars.
Right.
Well, what happened is there was a bunch of, well, interestingly enough, like I'm not going to say what it is, but my family's last name traces back to a Templar, actually, in Germany. But anyway.
Oh, wow. Oh, it's interesting.
So the French took the French, and, you know, the Templars were from a French town, and the original Templars. Not all Templars were French, obviously, but they were all either French or German. And they actually helped take over Greece. And you read ancient stories, right, about how the Celts at some point invaded Greece and Turkey, Western Turkey, and they took over those areas, right? Right, and you hear about that. Well, that's because what's happening is the Slavic populations are writing about that happening, and the Western French populations are writing about it, and the Latins are writing about it, and the Greeks are writing about it. Well, Scaliger says, all these things happened at a different time, right? But really, they're all contemporary with each other.
Oh,
so when the Slavic populations and other people are writing about that, or these kind of Northern Greek people and stuff, they're writing about it. They're saying, they're putting these sources as ancient, even though they don't have any parallels to another ancient chronology or something. They're just saying, it must have happened at that time. That's why history is so foggy at that time. You know, like all that stuff with the Sumerians and all this stuff. They say, this is all this stuff happening. Really, no, it's the French and the Templars and Germans that are going around, the Holy Roman Empire and whatever, that are going around. They're taking over these territories in Greece, and then they're getting driven out by the Greeks when the Greeks fight for their independence. You know?
Oh.
And they're fighting Persians.
Okay.
And yet the Greeks are fighting Persians. Well, how's that all happening? Well, you know, because it's all parallel. The time of Leonidas and all that stuff driving out the Persian invasions completely parallel with the Ottoman invasion. It's just that everyone's referred to under different names.
Oh, I see. Like pseudonyms or something?
Well, no, not pseudonyms. It's just that their naming conventions were different because sometimes pseudonyms, because sometimes the histories are written kind of as a satire instead, you know. But see, that's the thing, and that's what Scaliger gives away, is even though Scaliger does that, he takes things that are unrelated and does it. Because he doesn't want you to, you know what I mean? He doesn't want you to know where it's really being done. But it's also might not be entirely intentional on Scaliger's part, because Scaliger, like any pompous intellectual, wants to make himself, he's like the internet troll of his day. He wants to look like he's smarter than everybody. You know, it was really all about creating fame for his family name, is all it is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's just like when you look at how the Orthodox or the Catholic Church, they have a tendency to, like, you know, I mean, they're the winners, right? And the winners always write history, right? Isn't that the whole saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I never liked that saying because it generalizes things, but it's for the most part, yeah. I mean, the winners write the history of their territory. Yeah. And that's the thing. There's times where the Romans win, they write a history about this time period, but then the losers wrote some histories too. But the winning history gets favored by the chronologers like Scaliger.
Oh, right.
Right. And so the losing history can't be in the same time period anymore. It has to get pushed back into antiquity.
Oh.
Because it has to be as vague as possible.
Oh.
So that's another reason, is that he pushes losing histories further back in time. If you look at that, it's actually, because you're hitting on a good point with that. That's actually true. What happens is it's not that the winners write history. The winners write recent history, whereas the losers get pushed back into antiquity. So what happens is, like the French lose when the Greeks gain their independence. So the Greeks write a new history, and so that history about the French in Greece gets pushed back. I mean, do you ever wonder why Greeks eat French fries? I mean, have you ever figured that out? French fries are a big part of Greek cuisine. And that's because the French used to rule Greece. You might hear other bullshit stories, but that's the truth. That's what actually happened. They got driven out because they didn't rule there for very long. Just like the Latins used to rule Constantinople. You don't hear too much about that, huh? You don't hear about the Latin Empire of Jerusalem very often, huh? Or Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Latin Empire in Constantinople and all that other stuff, right? I don't want you to know about that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, these are, and then you want to talk about like the massacre of the innocents in Herod's time. That might be the massacre of the Latins in Constantinople. There's so many parallel events that when you really line stuff up, you can see it. It's just very difficult. He used math to come to that conclusion. So what he did is he looked at a bunch of historical texts and original sources that haven't been translated into other languages. He looked at them in their original language and had people read them. And, you know, he came up with the way, his math, I don't understand it because I suck at math. But what he does, he comes to the same conclusions I was already coming to without using math. But from what I gather when I look at his book, if you use math, you can find all that stuff a lot quicker. That's why I wish I was good at math. But, you know, like finding parallels with the popes of the 4th century and the 2nd century, they line up. It's crazy.
Wow. So it just kind of reminds me of this of the movie Dark City. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like basically where everyone on this little spaceship is like living out some nightmare, but they're all like clone dead people, and then just like but they'll have like these fake memories, and then every time the clock strikes 12, these aliens or these creatures inhabiting these dead bodies are like, yeah, definitely very reminiscent of the Matrix. But
the book I wanted to write.
Yeah, well, I mean, it came out before the Matrix, but it just reminds me like this idea that history, you know, it's like what we believe about history is just, you know, it's fake, you know. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting.
Oh, that's the great thing about history is that what's funny is it's supposedly a scientific discipline, but yet it requires faith and belief. But yet science doesn't require faith and belief. You don't have to believe anything in science. I mean, you have to believe hypotheses to work with them. You have to believe that in their possibility, you know?
Correct.
But yeah.
Well, here's my last question.
Faith in it.
Right. Well, here's my last question.
Yeah.
How do you see yourself now, compared to like say 5 or 6 years ago? Like, do you still see yourself as a Gnostic? I mean, what's your belief, or I don't even know belief, but I mean, what's your current state of mind? Like, do you even define yourself as
what
a
I
Gnostic,
say I'm a Gnostic,
or
yes.
What? Okay.
For me, being a Gnostic, you know, you have all these Looney Tune Gnostics like the Johannite Church and stuff, where they're like, oh yeah, Gnostics practice this and that. They're just fucking nutty Manichaean, Valentinian weirdos and shit, you know, and you know, they all ultimately just want to believe in Catholic forms of governance and having a church hierarchy and apostolic succession and boning little boys. I mean, ultimately, that's their thing. Hey, good for them. Whatever. Fuck them. You know, they're a bunch of psychic jackasses who are just going to keep reincarnating like all the rest of the Heilig idiots. And, you know, is the apokatasis something that I think about? Yeah. Do I really think that there's going to ever be one? No, absolutely not. I think that the world, material world is eternal, just like the non-material world, and that's the duality that existence has a duality, and that dark has to have light, or you couldn't have dark without light. You can't have good without evil because you have nothing to compare it to. So there's the material realm is for those who wish to inhabit it, and the spiritual realm is for those who wish to inhabit it. Is there going to be an apokatastasis? No, because that's impossible. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. It's a fucking Looney Tune idea. Maybe some Gnostics believed in that. I think they're wrong. I mean, the only way that's going to happen is if we create robots that kill us all.
Wait, the apokatastasis, you said?
Yeah, the apokatastasis requires that the material world be wiped out.
Oh, right. Well, how everything will return to the pleroma, right?
Right. That's the idea that all spiritual creation will return back to the pleroma, the fullness of God. Uh-huh. Well, basically, we're trying to rebuild God. God's like this broken machine that we're trying to rebuild, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, how are you supposed to do that if there's still light trapped in matter? Mm-hmm. Right, it's the idea that all light gets separated from matter. It's the great sifting. You know what I mean? Like everything is filtered.
Oh, like the wheat and tares,
right? Exactly. Yeah.
Idea. Okay, so like the wheat is like the light, and it's taken to the barn, right?
Yeah.
Or the storehouse, and of course the tares is like matter and hylix.
Yeah, and I don't know if I believe in all that. Do I think that reincarnation is real? Yeah, I do personally, because I've had an experience with past life memory. But I find it convincing.
Yeah.
Not having reincarnation, I'm not so sure that makes a lot of sense to me, but I think it has just as much possibility as being real that consciousness. There's different types of consciousness, though. Like, I was watching the Joe Rogan podcast, because he always has some trippy shit on there, and he had this guy on there who was talking about how, and he was like a scientist, and he was talking about when they study microbial mats, they find that microbial mats are like all this like microorganisms that are attached in the dirt and everything to each other that are all attached to mushrooms. And so it's a big network of mushrooms that basically have like, in a way, a nervous system attaching them all together. Mm-hmm. You can't really tell by looking at it, but they were actually able to source it. And it actually has its own consciousness. It responds to the other mushrooms. One mushroom like decides to shrink, the other one shrink or some shit. I don't know. And it's like miles and miles and miles long. It's like one of the biggest organisms in the world. It's bigger than any known living creature. Our giant microbial mats that are attached to mushrooms. It's just fucking crazy, dude. And it has its own nervous system, everything. And it seems to have its own consciousness. And, it reminds me of Mass Effect, where like there's a planet you go to on there where all the like, plant life is connected to each other, and it knows you're like there to like fuck up the planet, so it starts ganging up on you. So. Oh,
yeah. Here's an interesting experience. I just had this today, actually. I was just going for a quick run around the lake where I live, so I brought some bread with me, and I was like feeding these cranes, right? All these different. But I was feeding them, but they all they fly in a flock together, like instantly, like it's all like almost like they
have a shared
they function in one mind. Yeah, shared consciousness. And so I'm throwing all this bread, and they're all fighting for the bread. But when I'm done feeding them, then they all fly away at the same time, and then then when they see me, they come back and they associate me with food, right?
Yeah.
So they come to see me, but it's just they all come at the same time. It's weird. So I just thought. So I definitely believe that there's definitely a shared collective consciousness
in groups. Yeah, definitely, because it's people say, it's the fallacy of groupthink. Well, yeah, it may be a fallacy, and it may be a lack in critical thinking, but it might not be on a conscious level. It might be an unconscious level. Maybe the real consciousness is unconsciousness. Maybe what we think of as consciousness is inside out, upside down, and backwards. You know what I mean? Maybe it's really what people do unconsciously that proves the group consciousness.
Yeah.
Because
that makes
people
sense.
people behave in traffic like they have one consciousness sometimes too.
Right. Well, like in mobs, I mean, everyone acts violent, right?
Right,
So
yeah,
kind of a form of unconscious, you know?
So there's a lot we don't know about consciousness. That's true. This idea that we need to transcend consciousness and blah, blah, I don't know if I agree with that, but I think that there's levels of consciousness that we're not completely aware of. So it's hard to, with that limited amount of information we have, it's hard to make, it's hard for me to come to an opinion on whether the apokatastases need to happen. But I think that those group consciousness and the massive consciousness like that really proves, in my mind, reincarnation. You know, for me it does. But yeah, I'm not so sure of the apokatastases. I mean, I believe in the spiritual realm, though, definitely.
Yeah, me too. I definitely believe there's different spiritual realms.
And I think that's where we get our consciousness, you know?
Yeah. There's this one guy.
Right on that. Paul talks about consciousness and its divine link and things like that, you know?
Yeah. Then he says, Christ, I am no longer alive, but, Christ is in me, right?
Yeah.
or he's basically born again. But yeah, on that note, yeah, thank you so much for joining me on this really fascinating discussion. I mean, we talked about what?
Like everything.
Group consciousness, Fomenko, Gnosticism.
Yeah, I think it was pretty good for not.
The Orthodox.
I didn't have anything ready. I think there's a few things we talked about before we got on that we didn't talk about, but I don't remember what they were.
Yeah, me either. But no, I think it went okay. So yeah, I think it's really good, and I'm sure you will be on my show again at some point again.
Yeah, maybe next time I'll remember what was fascinating about Sinope and Salem, because there's some really fascinating information on those.
Yes, please do tell us, because I want to know too. But yeah, thank you so much, James. So I'll talk to you soon.
All right, you got it.
But tell me, what is Ragnarok? Let's show this ignorant Christian what Ragnarok is.